Slurpty derp. To all the slurp trolls out there, I'm coming for you. Anyway, today I'm going to do a little video explaining my song structuring process using my latest release, Helpless, as an example. And I had a really great Patreon Zoom hangout yesterday on Sunday with a few of my core supporters. So shout out to you guys if you're watching. And yeah, we'll have another one next month. Do like a monthly sort of Zoom hangout where we can just discuss music production, share around some ideas, and yeah, just get to know other inspiring musicians. So if you're not a part of that, highly suggest joining. Links for that all down below. Anyway, one of the things that we talked about, and it's something that's an age-old topic, is how you progress through a stage in a song when you get stuck. You get stuck like on a loop. And I get stuck all the time on songs as well. And for me, I feel like I'm always sort of scanning like how I get through the next door to unlock, the next part of the groove or how I can like make the loop a bit better. And then, it's always like, trial and error. And the most important thing is that you put in a lot of work and a lot of time so that you can allow for those sort of happy accidents to happen where you sort of, get through to the next level on the song, So it's a lot about hard work and just persistence. But also one of my main things, I guess, is like, starting to think about the whole structure of the song, sort of zooming out and thinking about, the actual narrative of the song, like as quickly as possible, because then you won't get so much bogged down in one loop, because a loop is only good in context of a song anyway. So, if you just focus on making one loop perfect, you're going to wear yourself out pretty quickly. So let's have a little listen to Helpless together. And I'm going to talk about how I structured it. And I guess, how long is the song? It's probably like 3 minutes or something. It's around, just around 4 minutes. And what I've done here is I've just sort of labeled some sort of names for each of the 16 bar sections. So it's at 170, I think it's at 174 BPM, I believe. We're at 174. So I always write at 172 or 174. And essentially everything that I do is designed in 16 bar blocks. And I learned this at university in Brighton when I was studying music production. We talked about how, each block is a story in its own right. And then, you have to transition from that story to the next story always. But, each 16 bar block has got to be its own sort of scene in the film. I always imagine a song like a movie, and this one is quite cinematic as well. I've used a lot of cinematic elements, but even if it's not, helping to think about a song like in terms of like a movie will help you to structure it better and make sure that all of your sections are sounding good, and then make you think about how you're going to transition between all of them. So let's have a listen to like one 16 bar section at a time. And then I'm going to talk about, what kind of went on, in my head as I was writing it. So the first 16 I've called the soundscape. So let's listen to this. So there we have it. What I'm doing is I'm bringing you into the world. It's like the opening credits almost. Maybe a zoomed out view of the landscape or something like that. You can envision it. But basically, you're introducing a lot of the elements that are going to be in the song. But it's all a bit of a mesh. It's a mix of like lots of things reverb together, all at very, very low volumes. But you've got a lot of sounds in there, kind of just like gelling together as one. And so we've got this piano which Reeves played. So how this track came about is I had a concept for a song which was inspired by the Dune soundtrack, particularly this song called Gom Jabbar, which is where there's this like really epic banshee kind of screaming female vocal, and I sent Reeves a text and said, you know, can you maybe like emulate this sound? It would be epic for a DNB song, and she absolutely smashed it first time round. So she's also a great producer. So she would write, you know, the melody and the lyrics to the song, and send me over a version, you know, in stems with all of her production as well. And I would basically just like redo most of the production. But there's a few things I left in, obviously her vocals, and then in this case I left in her piano playing that she did. So that's the original file that she sent. Those piano keys just as audio, like not quantized, and so that's just sort of staying in. And then I've added some extra sounds with it. You can hear there's this sort of low rumbling bass kind of drone almost, and I think it was a bass that she used on the drop on her version, and I thought it's not quite heavy enough. It's a bit too soft and mellow, but maybe I can use this in the intro as like a drone. So I basically kind of like reverbed it out, and made that like a sort of like a low end rumbling layer, because you can see even in the intro the frequency spectrum is filled out quite a lot. So it's not like I've just got mid-range or I've just got high end. It's still a whole range of sounds. They're just all very low, but that's important to give you a sense of fullness already from the beginning. And so that drone kind of rumbling bass, you know, helps us to fill out that low end area right from the start. We've got those like mid-range, that's basically being filled out by the piano. That's kind of the lead instrument, you know. The mid-range is always, you know, what's the lead? At any given point, there's one lead instrument. In this case, it's the piano here. And then in the high end, you'll hear all the reverbs of the different sounds come together. And you'll also hear these like soft hats that have really sort of reverbed out. They don't have like much attack on them, so they're very, very soft in the background. And then there's also these vocal textures like that, where I've just taken little parts of her vocal, you know, run it through a really, really long reverb, and just like sort of peppered that in to the background. Then you've got these little like once in a blue moon sort of cinematic like timpani drum hits as well, sort of starting that cinematic vibe. And then now we move on to the second section, which is what I've labeled as character, because this is where, you know, obviously if you're not using a vocal, like no problem, you could introduce the character of your lead or your main bass or something like that. But in this case, the song is mostly about Reeves and her vocal, so I introduce the character here. So this is where she comes in, and the vocals come in. So let's listen to this section together.
Make my mind up, I don't know if I'm alive. Down this low, lay to rest before I break. I don't know how much more I can.
So essentially it's much just a continuation of the soundscape, but with her vocals coming in as well. So there's a few like little things that change in the background in the soundscape. You know, the bass, I think the bass starts to change a little bit and gets a little bit more intense. But mostly the only real change is we now have a character in the middle of the frequency, the stereo spectrum. You know, she's quite central, and that was a point I've made in this song, is to keep her sort of voice quite raw and unedited, and a little bit in the center. So it's like a little bit of a lonely voice in a giant soundscape of other things going on. So that was the kind of idea. But there's a few like little effects where I've taken one word and I've sort of reverbed it out a bit. So when she says down this low, you'll hear
I'm alive, down this low.
So on that low, there's I've put it in another layer, and then I've like reverbed and delayed that one word. And this funny enough, that lyric down this low was a lyric that that line, Reeves actually hated it because she thought the pitch was off. I thought it was spot on. And she wanted to re-record it a few times, and we re-recorded it, and I tried to fit it in, but every time I put it in, it just didn't quite work. It sort of was resonating with the other sounds in the mix down in a bad way, so I had to make an executive decision and say no. The first take was actually the best, and I think it sounds great. And then she was like, okay, let's do it. So yeah, that's just a little side story, but.
I don't know how much more I can
So how much more I can take, and then we go straight into what I would say is like the signature sound of the song. This was like the whole concept. And yeah, for me, like it's much easier to write and finish a song when I have like a concept in mind. And this was the original concept. Like, I wanted to try and emulate some of that sort of female vocal sort of screaming, and I knew Reeves could do a good job of it because she comes from like a metal screaming background as well, so I knew she'd had that vocal range in her. So yeah, this was the main signature part of the song and the whole idea and concept for me. And when I originally had that vocal from her, I thought that it would be a layer like on my drop, in the background. But when I was then sort of composing it, I thought, what if I layer like a really fat like re-space underneath this vocal and have them playing together? So that's like the main and best part of the song for me, pretty much. So let's listen to now like the signature section, which is kind of like the build-up section as well before the drop. All right, so there's quite a lot of things that go on here to give you that energy. And again, well, not again because I haven't mentioned it yet, but in my 16 bar sections, although they're like one scene and one story, I still need things to change over the course of time. And so often I'll think about them in 8 bar sections as well. So the scene is a 16 bar loop, but halfway through the scene there might be something that starts to increase tension, for example, or reduce tension, depending on if you're going down or up in the next scene. So what we have in this case is we have a few little things in the background, like a few little drum hits and cinematic hits and splashes and white noise and things like that. But majoritively, it's the marriage of my re-space with the vocals that is, the main lead in this part. They work together, and if you listen, the re-space actually follows the pitch of the vocal for the most part. But then at the end, there's a few sections where her voice will go up and the Reese will go down, so they'll start to like harmonize. They'll be like working together. They're still in the same scale, but the keys of the two will be different. So it creates a bit of separation between them. So that's a compositional thing. Like you can have them following each other at the same time, but I wanted to like split them off so they sort of go in their own sort of lanes. So if you hear like around here, she goes she goes up and the Reese goes down. And then this is where I was mentioning the second part of the 16. This is where we start to amp up the energy, and that's where I'm like bringing in the drums. And so what happens is I bring in like these sort of drum almost like fills that start to like increase the tension. And then what will happen is the Reese and the vocal, which is our main lead, will sort of start to dip down. It will filter down, so it becomes a bit more in the background, and that allows the space for that main like normal vocal to come in just before the drop. How much more I can, and then drop. So listen to how the Reese and the vocal sort of come like filter down. So they filter down, give space for that vocal, And then as that vocal comes in, there's another layer of vocal underneath, which is an octave lower. So it's like, it's got a bit of a haunting kind of vibe, and that's also in the background. So that adds to the sort of edginess of it. So it's a double like vocal that comes in just before the drop. And yeah, we had that, listen to the drums next as well, because we have these sort of cinematic rolls. And then you'll hear like a little introduction of the snare as well. There's this little kind of ghost snare, little fill that comes in. So pay attention to the like the little snares that come in here. I'll play it just slightly earlier so you hear them as they come in. So we have like the two fills, you know, there's cinematic main fills and the little ghost snares that come in. And that's the first time you get a teaser of the snare to come, because before you don't really hear anything of what the snare is going to sound like. So I need to introduce it a little bit before the drop. And then, yeah, so we got those fills, the snare, ghost notes, the vocal lead main thing gets filtered down. And then that, you know, final vocal comes in just before the drop. How much more I can take. And then let's just listen straight over into the first drop as well, and then we'll talk about that.
How much more I can.
So what we have in this drop, in terms of like the lead, it's a call and response of a number of different basses, and then there's a little bit of a sort of peppering in of a weird kind of vocal effect that I made using Reebs' voice. I think meshed in with a bass and distorted or something like that, and kind of sweeps in, where you kind of hear go, yeah, it's like a sort of like a car going past or a ghost in the wind. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, and you know, on this main drop on the downbeat, you've got the re space, essentially the same texture that we have here. You know, that dun dun dun, that main like Reese synth bass is, you know, that I'm using kind of the same texture, but it's just a new version that's a bit more like in your face, a bit louder. Yeah, it's louder in the mix, and it's got a bit of a different movement on, and it's like almost like a foghorn in a way, but it's like more of a kind of neurofunk version. I don't really know how you would describe it, like a saw wave Reese just held out, and it's quite harsh in the high end, so it wouldn't, you know, having it just a little bit, and then I go straight into the response bass, which is quite the opposite. You know, it's more of a low rolling kind of sine wave with an atmospheric top to it. So listen to the sort of contrast between the call and response here. It's got a movement on it that I've made. You know, I made it to try and be funky with the drums. So it's like this sort of sine wave, and you wouldn't really hear it so well if it didn't have this atmospheric layer on top. So it's got a bit of a kind of noisy layer that follows along with the sine wave. Okay, but there's also other things going on in the background. There's a little like open hi-hat that you can hear. Yeah, that's really cool to kind of take your attention away a little bit. And then we also have this sort of these sound design sort of sweeps in the background where they kind of pitch down, so it goes whoom. So try and as that sort of sine wave with the noise comes in, listen to the little sound design pitching down thing in the background. Okay, so boom, and then there's a little synth stab, which kind of takes your attention away again. So it's quite complex on the amount of things that are going on, but a lot of these things are happening in the background. So in a way, you know, that demonstrates how important the background is to tell the story of the song. So, you know, I have my main elements in the foreground, you know, the kick, the snare, that main saw kind of bass, and then that main response like sine with like the atmosphere on top. But then there's all these things in the background, like that open hi-hat and this synth down pitchy thing, and then you hear like her vocal sort of come in here. Oh, just before actually. And then here it's pretty much a repeat, but the sine wave sort of goes down in pitch on this like second part here, and then we have this other like kind of synth bass that comes in with a sort of fluttery effect I probably did on the LFO tool. You also notice in the background there's a little low pitched vocal as well that goes take. I don't know if you can quite hear it. There's a lot of stuff happening in the background, and that all adds to the vibe. Anyway, let's finish listening to the drop, and then we'll talk about the bridge. So, you know, that was my main drop, and in a way, it was like slightly anticlimactic in a way, but obviously I did it on purpose. But you know, that signature Reese kind of, you know, and vocal is like really like it's really epic, and then I like the contrast where it kind of slows down a bit on the drop, you know, so it's kind of a bit of a switch in energy. It's almost like the drop sort of takes the energy down, but it's a contrast because we first hear like all of that like punchy kick and punchy snare and those punchy basses, but at the same time the structure kind of slows down as well. So, but I liked that kind of effect.
How much more I can.
You know, so it's a little bit more space in like the rhythm, you know. But yeah, let's move on to the bridge. And here, yeah, I sort of drop down the energy a little bit more, and her vocals come in. And yeah, so let's just have a little listen to that. So this is, in a way, for me, I'm bringing the energy down overall, but at the same time, the speed of the drums kind of comes up. So it's a bit of a weird contrast because you have like an increase in speed and rhythms in the drums, but you know, having that piano come back in to sort of suck a bit of the intensity out of the song again, and also having that vocal come in again, so it becomes more like it's more I don't want to say commercial, but it's, you know, has more feeling in this part. It's less, you know, about the aggression, it's more about the feeling now. So this part should have labeled like the feeling section, but yeah, this is like the main vocal that comes in then, obviously, and so I'm prioritizing that, of course. So the vocal is obviously the lead at this point, so everything else is working around it, you know, and there's other basses that sort of creep in underneath it, but they're mostly sidechained to the vocal. And then they kind of they're not always there, so there's a bit of space. If you listen to like how the bass sort of cuts off, and you can just hear the bit of the vocal on its own. You know, right there at the end, made up my mind. I kind of decided to cut the sort of basses out so you can just hear the vocal like a bit more on its own there, give it a bit more room. But yeah. The other points, the bass works along with it. Those kind of brassy synth basses, they work along with it, but they're a bit more in the background. You know, I've tamed the volume a bit, and I've sidechained them a bit, so the mid-range is not as strong on them. So they've got that bassiness, but the main mid-range has been sort of sculpted out with a sidechain, so that the vocal can sort of take the spotlight, because that's, you know, it would sound terrible if the vocal didn't have the spotlight, because it's all about the main character in this, you know, in the song. And I love that part where she says helpless, because it kind of goes down in pitch a little bit, and then you can hear the trickling of the piano is sort of going up a bit. So it's another like sort of nice little harmony just here. Help me, I'm helpless. Anyway, now I kind of switch straight back into a higher energy drop, or not drop, but sort of a second drop almost. We go into the higher energy section, which I've called the re-energize, and it's sort of a bit of a surprise. It comes out of nowhere because we've had this bridge, and then suddenly it stops, and then there's like an open hi-hat, but to really give that switch like that impact, I purposely did the Reese notation like a bit higher up and a bit weirder, and it's a sort of a different like note in the scale that you hadn't really heard it before. So if you listen now to the re-energize section and hear how it sort of like switches up quickly, and that's helped in the transition by like the new sort of note on the re space. So again, that higher sort of note on the Reese helped it come in. And then as we go back into like the drums and the bass, it starts to roll out a bit more. And I've reintroduced these cinematic drums, and they become quite a main sort of feature now, that you kind of pay attention to them a little bit more. So they're the kind of cinematic sort of drums that I used in the intro, and now they're providing that sort of percussion that kind of it kind of amps up the energy a bit and makes it a bit more cinematic and climactic, so that's the kind of the vibe here, was just to like get a bit more energy up again right at the end before we go into our breakdown. So just have one more listen to this section and like pay attention to how those like cinematic drums like sort of contribute to the energy and sort of make it a bit more cinematic and climactic, I suppose. And you'll notice it's similar to the first drop, but actually that response bass where before it was a kind of this low sine wave with a bit of sort of atmosphere on. It's now a more sort of, it's a different bass patch, and it's probably designed in Vital, and it's got more of a grittiness and neurofunk kind of edge to it, and it's more distorted. So it's just a completely different bass sound. So I've basically switched up the response sound. The call, that question, is still that Reese that was before. And the only thing that's different really is that response is now more aggressive. So in line with those cinematic drums amping up the tension, the response bass also is amping up the tension now because it has more of an aggressive character on it. Yes. Now, as we go into the breakdown, it's pretty simple. This section here, I would say, arguably maybe the most simple section, it's basically a version of the soundscape that we had in the intro. So a few of the things obviously tail off. So we have a bit of sort of reverb tails and some vocal like one shots. But here, I'm being a bit quicker with the build up now because we're getting to the end of the track, and I want to have just 2 16 bars before I go back into the drop, whereas here I had 3, so I had to design them to be faster. So the tension coming up for the second drop happens at a faster rate. So in this first 16 bar section, the first half is just like the kind of soundscape, with a few vocal things in the background, but then the second half I bring that piano back in again pretty quickly. So if you listen to how it sort of comes in halfway, it sort of starts to speed up the composition a bit more. And the reason I didn't have it in here was because I needed a little bit of space for a breather. You know, I had to just take it down a bit without, you know, continuing the main kind of melody. I wanted to give that a bit of a rest. And no, you know, just a little 8-bar rest. Then the melody comes in. And then we're building up, ready for the character to come back in. We're ready for like Reeves' vocals to come back in again. And so this is now going on to the next build up. So this is the fresh build I've called, because it's a different build up to what I did before. Before I had the vocal, and then, you know, as a kind of part of the intro, and then I went to the signature sound with the screaming and the re-space. But this build up is going to be different, because we're going to actually have the vocal like kind of singing lyrics with the re-space, but without the screaming, you know, and the screaming is going to come in on the drop this time. So it's very different, you know, structurally, you know, using the elements in different combinations. And so here, you know, I had to do different mix down styles to, you know, for each 16-bar section, it's almost its own mix down in a way, because you have to balance all the main elements together. So, you know, now like the re-space working with the singing like lyrics was a different balance, you know, so I had to sort of reduce the re-space more into the background to give priority to the singing, you know, because the singing was more important. Here on the first sort of drop, that layer of her screaming sort of sits on top of the re-space quite nicely. But here, with all the articulations of the actual lyrics and everything, I have to give that more priority. So the re-space had to take more of a back seat here. So let's listen to the fresh build, and then we'll talk about it, because there's a few more things I need to mention about this part. So, yeah, you hear those cinematic drums come straight in. So they're like clogging up the mix down room as well. So along with that, the vocals, you know, I actually used the original vocal from the intro at first to write the song. And I thought it was all sort of finished, and I sent it to Reeves, and she said, you know what, let's re-record the vocals for the second drop. And I'm going to do the same lyrics, but I'm going to sing it in a more aggressive and, you know, more tense way. And that was absolutely a great idea. So that was, you know, the one time when we sort of I resent a file to her, and she sent back some new vocal stems, which I just added in. And so I had to sort of mix them in again, you know, in terms of the mix down. I had to rebalance it with those new ones. And I love the last part where she goes, how much more I can take. There's a little real aggression on her voice in this part here. I don't know how much more I can take. Excuse me. I've been talking a lot on this video. Maybe I need some more coffee. Give me a quick slurp. It's probably cold now. Yeah, so I love the tone on her voice and that. And again, she sent a few versions, and in every situation, it was the first take that was always the best. So I ended up trying a few different versions out she sent afterwards, because she wasn't quite happy with the way her voice sounded on some of them. But for me, again, it was the first take that was just the one. So we ended up pretty much going with that. There were a couple of words where there was some glitches in the recording, so I had to use some of her other versions and cut out that word and replace that word, so there was not sort of this recording sort of click on the sound, you know, so there was a little bit of editing involved. But anyway, structurally, you know, it's the most important thing is the build is different. And for me, like, I'm writing a song which I want it to be a little bit more like classic in a way, like it's kind of a blend between a DNB and, I don't want to say a pop song, but it's got like, I wanted it to be like a bit more radio friendly in a way, perhaps. Like, it hasn't actually been played on the radio, but I wanted it to have, you know, every section is different basically. And there is actually one section which is pretty much the same. So the bridge here is pretty much the same as the bridge here. But other than that, every other 16 is its own scene in its own right. and a lot of detail went into each one. And yeah, so here, you know, we've got those cinematic drums. We've got her singing again, but it's coupled with the Reese this time. And, you know, it amps up the tension a lot. And we're going to go into super energy for the second section here. So let's have a little listen to the super energy second drop.
I don't know how much more I can take.
So what we have here is essentially a version of the first drop in terms of the composition of the basses and the call and response. Pretty similar melodically and everything like that. But now we have these extra layers in there of, you know, her screaming vocal on top and all of these extra ghost snares. The ghost snares, they don't really affect the basses so much, so I could have just sort of done them on their own and not had to make any mix down adjustments. But with this sort of screaming vocal on top of everything, you better believe I had to sidechain the basses a bit more to get that to come through. So again, in this section here, I'm rebalancing all the mix down because there's a lot more sounds in there. So I had to sculpt out some, you know, more spots from the basses and such. You know, in the mid-range especially, or the sort of higher part of the mid-range, to allow that vocal to cut through, because obviously, you know, you hear it straight away. And, you know, on the first drop here, you know, you can hear how big and impactful that sort of re-space is. It takes up the whole spectrum pretty much. But here it can't, so it's a different version of it. It's more laid back because it's more of a blend of a few different things together, rather than like one main sound. So the dynamics are very, very different here. So I have to mix things down differently. So it's all about the dynamics. That's what makes a great song to me, is having each section has a very sort of different dynamic kind of twist to it. Just hit me up for a one-on-one production session and it's going to be a lot easier for you. Yeah, links for that are down below, by the way. That is my main job. I teach music production. I did that before YouTube. That is like, YouTube is not my main job. Like, teaching is my main job. So if you ever want one-on-ones, then definitely just book yourself in. You don't even have to say anything, just book in, and we'll just smash it. Yeah, anyway, so what was I saying? Super energy section. Yeah, so it's a whole different dynamic 16 bar you know, section, you know, and this was one of the hardest ones because this is where I had to, you know, this is where it's the super energy, so there's loads of things at once, so I had to spend more time, you know, finding the space for each element so you could actually hear everything going on, you know, and it's not just sort of overly distorting or something like that. So one other thing that I wanted to mention is the drop. I love doing this thing on the drop. It's quite a classic DNB like trick where you have this sort of main vocal and then you just cut out the last word and you don't say the last word and you go into the drop. So where it says how much more I can take, you know, I cut off the take on purpose on the first drop here.
How much more I can.
But I thought, you know, a great way to make the second drop different is to leave it in on the second drop. So here I've left it in.
How much more I can take.
Just to give that extra variation for that kind of part. So obviously here, you know, one of my favorite parts of the track because it was just super, super high energy. I like lots of, for me, this is one of the songs where I really, really like every section. And you can tell, like, I put a lot of effort into trying to make it, you know, a great listening experience from start to finish without, you know, ever feeling like it's repetitive or getting boring. So it's less like a club banger for me. It's more like a Spotify listen at home, listen on your workout or something, but also definitely mixed down punchy enough to play in the club, and I definitely will be playing it in the club as well. So that was my kind of goal, to have something that I can use in all situations. But anyway, let's roll into the bridge, and you can kind of sit here. It's pretty similar to the first one, but let's listen through anyway. So there's a slight difference in this bridge section, and then we'll talk about the outro as well, which is also important for me. And that is mostly in the transition. So obviously with all these 16 bar sections, not only have you got to make them all different, all their own little scene in their own right, all with their different dynamic mixes and different different dynamic adjustments to the elements, so that they fit together in different ways to make it interesting. Not only have you got to do that, you then need to think about how am I actually transitioning from this scene into the next. Am I doing a Star Wars wipe cut just straight over, or how, bringing some of the new elements in to introduce them so that you can switch over a bit more smoothly, or straight cut like a jump up DJ. However you want to do it is up to you. But in this case, with the bridge and the re-energize section here, it was quite a quick cut, but I wanted that abruptness, so it was just like a downbeat, an open hi-hat, and then this higher pitch reese, and then you go into this re-energized section. So that's how I went from the bridge to the re-energize. But to go from the bridge to the outro, that's the part that makes this bridge section, slightly different to the first one. And that is that basically, really simply, I just filter out the drums. So, I'm going down to the end of the song. So, why not just filter out the drums nice and easily, just on an EQ automation. I think I did it here. So you hear her vocal a bit more clearer as those drums filter down, and then we drop into the outro, which is basically where you have just a line or two of her vocal, which I've done on a separate layer, and I've put loads of effects on. I've turned it down. I've put some Sound Toys, what's it called, Echo Boy, or some weird telephone tape delays, weird presets that you wouldn't want to use on your main vocal because it would ruin it. But here I want to just ruin it and put it in the background a bit more. And then you actually hear these other little soundscape sounds that you may not have noticed that were in the intro before. So at the time of writing it, I was watching the latest season of Stranger Things, and there's this constant sort of theme of these clocks, these big old grandfather clocks, sort of floating around in the air, and you're sort of hearing those. And then I was thinking I want some sort of clock and some sort of bells and representing time, sounds that sort of represent time. So you hear there's this sort of it's almost like clock sort of ticking, and there's also these sort of church bells, and the church bells are kind of out of pitch with the rest of the track, because obviously a church bell has a tone on it. And if you listen closely, it's not in key with the rest of it. But I was I quite like that dissonance. So you only hear two bells, and they're very quiet. But if you pay close attention, they're not in pitch at all. And that sort of ticking of the clock. Don't know if it's actually a clock tick. I don't know what that sound is, but it sounds a bit like a clock. And that sort of, goes on towards the end. The vocal sort of fades out with a bunch of reverb, and that little low-pitched version, which I've used throughout in the background of a lot of the track as well. You sort of hear it on its own a bit more here. So that I'm hopeless, that's layered in, on the rest of the track in certain elements as well. So a lot of background details you don't pick up on, on your first listen, all add to the soundscape of the song. And yes, that's wrapping up the end of this video pretty much. So yeah, it's been a journey, this song, but that's how it should be. And I'd rather write a song that takes a bit more time, and focus on the details, make it like a cinematic experience. If it takes me longer and I can't write as many songs, so be it, because I'd rather have something that I would really listen to and enjoy, later down the line, in the next years or so. I'd like to listen back to it and still enjoy it. So that's fine for me. I'm quite in the mood for writing some songs that just take a bit more effort, but in the end, yeah, they have more of a re-listening kind of re-listenability. I don't know if that's a word. Anyway, I hope you learned a little bit about my compositional process, and always it's different. But the main thing I always think about, and this is what I was taught at university, is to really think of those blocks as their own stories in their own right. And then, how are you going to transition from one to the other is always up to you. And, is the next block going to have more energy? Is it going to have less energy? Are you going to really introduce what's going to happen? Or are you going to go for a little surprise, switch? You can do both. There's no right or wrong in music, but as long as you just take the time to think about what it is you want to do, then you're going to be able to just design a song that you're going to be more happy with, I suppose. And you might not worry so much about, this one drop loop that you've been working on for 4 months, and, you haven't even thought about all of these other sections that you can be focusing on and making sounds for, and then bringing those sounds in to the drop that were the sounds that you needed, so always zoom out to the song structure as a whole, and it will make you a lot more inspired to write and finally finish that song that you've not finished yet. So why haven't you finished that song yet? Come on, send me it in Discord for a Patreon feedback live stream. Hit me up for one-on-ones. What more do you want from me? I've been Artifact, your friendly or unfriendly host. I don't know. That's up to you. Ciao for now. Ciao, Bella. Much love. Don't do anything I wouldn't. Like and subscribe. Comment down below if you like my face. Bye.
Too great.